Here's something I don't think we talk about enough. Most managers aren't overlooking high performing women. They're making decisions with incomplete information. That changes everything. Because if your manager can't clearly explain the value you create, they can't confidently advocate for your promotion. Today, I'm going to show you how to change that. Ready? Let's go. Welcome to Career Growth for Working Women. This show is for women who are done waiting to be noticed and ready to be compensated for the value they already bring. I'm Shannon, a promotion and compensation coach, and I help women position themselves for real advancement, not by working harder, but by showing their value more strategically using what I call the 5% method. If you're ready for clarity, confidence, and career growth that actually pays off, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hello, friend. Welcome back to the show. I've been thinking about something this week. Actually, it's a question. How much of your work does your manager really know about? Not what they've approved, not what they've heard about, not the final result. How much of everything you contribute do they actually know? I think if I asked that question to a room full of high-performing women, most of them would answer the same way. Probably most of it. It makes sense. After all, they're your manager. They assign work, they meet with you, they review your performance. Surely they have a pretty good picture of everything you're doing, right? Here's what I've noticed after coaching hundreds of high-performing women. That assumption is one of the biggest reasons women unintentionally make promotions harder than they need to be. Not because they're doing anything wrong, because they're expecting their manager to see something their manager was never in a position to see. Let me explain. Think back to yesterday, not just the big moments, the whole day. The conversation where you calmed down a frustrated teammate. The email you rewrote so it landed better. The problem you solved before it became someone else's emergency. The customer you took care of. The relationship you strengthened. The meeting where you connected two ideas that helped everyone move forward. The newer employee you coached without anyone asking you to. Now, let me ask you another question. How much of that did your manager actually witness? Probably less than you think. And that's not because they're a bad manager. It's because they have their own version of yesterday. While you were solving problems, they were probably sitting in meetings you weren't invited to, answering questions from their leader, working through budgets, headlining issues from another department, supporting someone else on your team, making decisions you'll probably never hear about. This might surprise you. Your manager is just as immersed in their own work as you are in yours. That's why I've stopped assuming managers see everything, because they can't. And honestly, they shouldn't have to. A few months ago, I was coaching a woman after her annual performance review. She was frustrated, not because she'd received negative feedback. Actually, her manager told her she had a great year. The frustration came from something else. She looked at me and said, "I don't understand. They only talked about 2 of the projects I worked on." Then she started listing everything else she had accomplished. The cross-functional project she led, the new process she created, the employee she mentored, the customer issues she resolved, the countless problems she prevented before anyone else even knew they existed. Finally, she stopped and asked, "How could they forget all of that?" And I remember saying something that completely changed the direction of our conversation. I said, "What if they didn't forget? What if they never had the full picture?" And she just looked at me. So I asked her another question. If someone asked you to describe everything your manager accomplished over the last 6 months, could you? And she laughed. Then she said, not even close. Exactly. Not because she wasn't paying attention, not because she didn't respect her manager, because she hadn't lived their days. She wasn't in every meeting. She didn't hear every conversation. She didn't see every decision. So I said, the same is true in reverse. That was the moment everything shifted. Because here's the reality. You experience every step of your work. Your manager experiences snapshots. You remember the process. They often remember the outcome. Those are two very different perspectives. And once you can understand that, everything starts to make more sense. You stop expecting your manager to read your mind, and you start asking a much better question. How can I make it easier for my manager to recognize the leadership impact I'm already creating? That's the question that changes careers. Because now you're no longer waiting to be noticed. You're becoming intentional about helping someone else understand your value. And that's not self-promotion. That's career positioning. And there's a difference. One of the things I believe with my whole heart is this. High-performing women don't have a talent problem. They have a positioning problem. You already are creating tremendous value. The challenge is that your impact isn't always positioned clearly enough for the people making promotion and compensation decisions to recognize it, communicate it, and advocate for it. That's why I do this work. Because I don't want another woman questioning her potential when the real issue is that no one has ever taught her how promotions actually work. Here's what I want you to remember. Your manager isn't overlooking your value. Pause and let that sink in. They're making decisions with the information they have. And that means you have more influence than you think. Because information can be shared. Clarity can be created. Understanding can grow. That's hopeful because it means you don't need to become more valuable. You need to help your manager recognize the value that's already there. And that's where the conversation starts. I think this is where so many high-performing women accidentally make their careers harder than they need to be. Because once they realize their manager doesn't see everything, their first instinct is often, I need to work harder. So let me tell you something. No, that's not the answer. Working harder only creates more work your manager may never fully see. Instead, let's make your work easier to recognize. Those are two different strategies. Here's what I've noticed. Most women use their one-on-one meetings as status updates. They answer questions, give project updates, talk about deadlines, discuss what's next. And all of that, it's important. But here's the question I want you to start asking yourself before every one-on-one. If this was the only conversation my manager remembered from this week, what would I want them to understand about my leadership? Not your task list, your leadership. That's a completely different way to prepare. Maybe you want them to recognize that you're becoming the person who brings clarity when projects get messy. Maybe you want them to see how you've strengthened relationships across departments. Maybe you want them to notice that people naturally come to you for guidance. Maybe you want them to recognize that you've started thinking more strategically instead of simply completing assignments. Those are leadership stories. And stories are memorable. I've been learning a lot about executive communication recently, and one idea has stayed with me. People don't remember everything we say. They remember how we made them think and what stood out most. That's why intentional word choice matters so much. The same is true for your career. If every conversation with your manager sounds like a list of completed tasks, that's probably what they'll remember. If your conversation consistently connects those tasks to business impact, that's what they'll remember instead. Here's an example. Imagine your manager asks, "How's the new onboarding process going?" You could say, "It's going well. We finished the updates." That's accurate. But listen to this. "We finished the updates and we've already cut onboarding time by 20%. The biggest win is the new team members are becoming productive much faster." Same project, different conversation. The first answer describes activity, while the second answer describes impact. That's leadership language. And leadership language helps people advocate for you. Here's what I want you to remember. Your manager doesn't need a list of everything you've done. They need a clear understanding of the value you're creating. That's the story they'll carry into promotion conversations. Let me tell you something. This is one of the biggest mindset shifts I see in the women I coach. They stop asking, "Did my manager notice?" And they start asking, "Did I make it easy for my manager to understand why this mattered?" That question changes everything, because now you're taking ownership of something you can actually influence. Communication, not politics, not favoritism, not luck, communication. And communication is a skill, and that means it can be learned and it can be practiced, and it can become one of the greatest advantages in your career. Here's what I want you to borrow from me until you fully believe it yourself. Helping your manager understand your value is not bragging. It's part of your job. Because if your manager can't clearly explain your impact, they're going to have a hard time advocating for your promotion or even your raise. Not because they don't want to, because they don't have enough language. And one of the greatest gifts you can give your manager is language. Language to describe your leadership. Language to explain your contribution. Language to connect your work to meaningful business results. That's career positioning. That's promotion and compensation strategy. And that's how high-performing women become the obvious choice. So, before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one small promotion move for this week. Before your next one-on-one, write down the answer to these two questions. What am I most proud of accomplishing since we last met? And why did it matter? Notice I didn't ask what you did. I asked why it mattered, because that's the conversation your manager is most likely to remember. I'll leave you with one final thought. Your manager isn't a mind reader, and they don't need to be. They simply need a clearer picture of the leader you already are. Help them see that picture, one conversation at a time, one story at a time, one leadership moment at a time. Because every conversation is an opportunity to make your value a little easier to recognize. And when your value becomes easier to recognize, you become much harder to overlook. All right, I'll talk to you soon. If today's episode sparked something for you, a question, an idea, or a realization, don't ignore it. I offer promotion strategy calls where we walk through your current role, your goals, and how to position you for your next promotion or raise without burning out or overworking. You can book that call using the link in the description. And if this episode helped you, sharing it or leaving a quick review makes a bigger difference than you know. Until next time, keep showing your value clearly. You've earned it.